Hello and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Today we're talking about Japan, a place I know very little about, and that's something not talked about a lot in the Western left or, in fact, the Western news. So Japan recently held elections and there's a new prime minister, Sanae Takaichi. She's the first woman to hold the office and she's also been nicknamed the Japanese Margaret Thatcher. At the same time, the right-wing populists in Japan have grown recently. That's under the Sanae Takaichi party. You've also got the Japanese Communist Party, yet that party is also weakening and it's seen the lowest electoral result in recent elections. And also the union density rate is the lowest in 80 years. So what's the big picture? To talk about what's going on in Japan and how to make sense of this rather important country in the middle of big global changes, I'm joined by Comrades Philipp and Jeanne from Tokyo. Welcome, comrades.
Hey there.
Hi.
Hi. So I want to start by asking you, as I said, in the Western left, we don't talk about Japan a lot. So I want to start by asking you to give us a bit of a introduction to Japan, Japanese imperialism, and the broader world context. For me, as I understand it, Japan's defeat in World War II really defines its national politics, but also its place in the world. It's an important country for the US, especially in its overall strategy for China and the East. So could you start by telling us a little bit about Japan's relationship with the US, or just generally how to understand Japan in the world?
Okay, sure. Definitely you're right. Japan's defeat in the Second World War really has defined the society since the Second World War and still to a large degree actually does so. I mean, our recent article we published in Japanese, it has a point in the title saying Japan in crisis. Mm-hmm. And that's really a key point. So there's a real crisis of the establishment here, because so going back from after the Second World War, I mean, fundamentally, like Germany, I think, was really integrated into the U.S. anti-Soviet war drive as an anti-communist bastion, and so that was sort of how Japanese imperialism, as a junior partner of the U.S., basically functioned for many decades. And it had a very small military budget. It was built up as part of the alliance with the US. It became more and more economically powerful, but it didn't have a very strong army. At the same time, what's really important in Japan is the US they wrote a new constitution for the defeated Japanese imperialism. And that constitution said, Japan cannot do war again. So, of course, a big part of that was to make sure its previous competitor was not going to challenge the US. And at the same time, of course, Japan did help a lot the US against the Soviet Union. So that's the constitution. Now the Soviet Union was destroyed. And now, as we know, the US is really targeting China big time, and especially now under Trump. And so Japanese imperialism is forced now actually in this current situation to make a real change of the whole post-war setup, to rearm. And I'm sure many listeners also saw recently when Trump visited Japan, they were standing on the U.S. aircraft carrier, and so that's kind of the direction now that the Japanese imperialism is going, with Trump, and actually what the new Prime Minister Takaichi is about to a large degree, like this rearming. Japan.
That's very helpful. We'll definitely come back to this right after my next question, which is a little bit of the sense of the domestic politics. Like, who are the main parties of the bourgeoisie? What are the different political forces? Because I know we're going to end up talking about Takaichi, of course, and the LDP, which is a liberal democratic party, but also we're going to be talking about the Japanese Communist Party. So if you could give us a sense of who are the dominant forces in the political landscape of the country?
Well, the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, has been in power basically uninterrupted since 1955. And they are the dominant party in the country. Over the years, they have split and fractured into several smaller parties. The biggest opposition party is called the Constitutional Democratic Party. One of the reasons for the split, outside of personality differences, was the question of whether or not to revise the Constitution. And that revision centers on one thing in particular, and that is Article 9, which Philip mentioned, and that is that Japan would never hold a land sea and air military, i.e. they wouldn't have the ability, the forces to go outside of the country. Of course, Japan does have a military. It's extremely technologically advanced, the self-defense forces, but that was seen as something that was only for internal usage, not for external uses. The Constitutional Democratic Party was opposed. They're in the process of changing this position to revising the Constitution. The LDP has pushed very hard since the 1990s, actually since counter-revolution in the Soviet Union, to change that clause in the Constitution. In terms of the opposition parties, I will talk a little bit about the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party. At the moment, their influence is it's very, very small, but that was not always the case. They're in the opposition, as are about 7 other smaller parties. Those are kind of the main important parties, I would say, in the country at the moment.
Okay, cool. So I guess picking up on some threads from both of your responses to those basic questions is, okay, so we've now got Takaichi. And Philip, you've already sort of mentioned how she's pro-militarization. She's really cozying up to Trump. I guess, could you help us make sense of the recent elections? They come at a kind of an important moment where we're seeing huge changes in the global rules-based order. So what does this represent from the point of view of the Japanese ruling class? What was the basis of her appeal? How do we make sense of her victory?
Mm-hmm. I mean, actually, to be clear, the LDP lost the election, right? Which was one of the motivations for the previous prime minister to step down. So she basically filled in a losing situation, you know.
Oh, okay.
Just to be clear. So since Trump, as we know, so Trump has been really on the offensive since he got into power in the US, and which included, of course, repressing countries like Mexico. Also, obviously Japan is not Mexico, but still, even as an imperialist power, is not at all as powerful and much weaker than the US. So they had to, the tariffs and the threats of measures of the US against Japan was really, it's a huge problem for Japan, for Japanese imperialism, actually. And it's sort of coming, the problem for Japan is like double-edged, because the campaign against China is making a huge problem for Japanese imperialism, because Japanese, imperialism has made huge profits from the trade with China, which Trump seeks to undercut. And at the same time, Trump seeks to force basically Japanese companies, to invest in the US and build there and not in Japan. So the economy is really, so in that sense, I think that came at a time when, for years and years, the overall living situation of the population has been, deteriorating. Everything has just been getting worse and worse. And now it's sort of, Trump is putting the gun to Japan's economy. And everybody saw that the LDP is just going to do the same thing over. So the LDP lost the election, the upper house election in July. And who really was the winner at that time was the right wing, the Sanseito that you mentioned, because they were the ones saying, we're not going to accept, all these attacks on, we are going to, the real culprits are the foreigners. We have to, Japan first. The guy actually said, we are learning from Trump, racist, nationalist, and we have to go against China is another point of Sanseito. So they were the real winners in this situation.
But these foreigners are not the Americans; they're the Koreans and the Chinese.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, it's a little bit broader than that. Japan's immigration policies have been very, very strict, and they started to loosen somewhat towards the end of the 1990s. And the reason for that is Japan has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, if not the lowest. And there was concern, and particularly in the countryside, people were leaving the countryside to come into the cities to work, so nobody was working in the farms. So they needed labor. And what Sanseito is talking about, of course, he's talking about the long-term Korean population in this country. But he's talking about immigrant workers from Iran, Kurdish workers, from Nepal, from Burma, from Indonesia, from Vietnam. There has been, for Japan, a very large influx of migrant workers. It's still like less than 3% of the population. And basically what Sanseto said is they offered an answer to why, for some people, the lives of the working class and the petty bourgeoisie and the poor have gotten worse over the decades. And that was because foreigners are here and they're taking your jobs and we have to get rid of them. And that will make the economy grow more.
I mean, from the sounds of it and the way you explain it in your article, it really does sound similar in terms of the dynamic that you see in, for example, the appeal that Trump has amongst layers of the working class, especially the white working class. I mean, it's similar also to the basis for the growth of the right-wing populist party Reform in Britain right now. So I guess, do you see that those dynamics are kind of similar, that the working class has been under attack under the sort of status quo that's dominated the last 30, 40 years? And then you have the growth of right-wing forces who then scapegoat the immigrants and other minorities, pointing the finger at them. And that really starts to be the basis for toxic divisions amongst working class and immigrant people. I'm wondering, like, how is the dynamic similar or different to how we're seeing it play out in some countries in the West?
I think there's a big element of what you said. It's very similar, on the question of racism and so on. I do think, from what I've seen, I don't know so many other countries, but like I know from Germany and maybe reading about other US, for example, one difference here is really this question of, in our article we talk a bit about the pacifism and the idea of peace, in Japan. And I think because this has been such a key, the idea that, okay, our society now is protecting peace in whichever, it's, of course, that there were different ways that the government talked about this, the Communist Party talked about this, and the socialist groups talked about it. But, this is really why we have to protect the Japan as it is right now. And so this has played a key role, in terms of the ideology of the state to justify, how things are, and that it shouldn't be really challenged. And I think because, for example, Sanseto, one other big element of what they were saying is like the right wing going back to the glorious days of the great imperial Japanese army. To hell with all these pacifist weaklings who are destroying our country.
Okay, so they would want to reform Article 9.
Yeah, exactly,
yes.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But in a kind of in a radical way, like a very openly militarist way. And why does this have appeal? And we have talked to people here, and a few people have said they know it's not because many workers want war, obviously, because they love militarism, but they are really fed up with this, like, oh, things are peaceful and now it's so much greater and the best we can have. And so in Japan, this has the question of peace has played a big role in this, and driving many workers to the right, I think, because what they saw is this supposedly progressive, peaceful society is kind of ruining me, giving my kids no future, and I can barely keep my job.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to see what the sort of the state ideology has been coming out of its defeat in World War II. I was wondering, like, how does the left deal with this question of pacifism and what is essentially a state ideology? What is their attitude towards the question of Article 9 or just the general ideology that workers are constantly forced to swallow, that Japan is a beacon of world peace?
Well, the left totally embraces the pacifism. Just as an example, annually there is a rally, and it's basically a rally to defend the Constitution, which draws I think in May of this year even, it drew about 60,000 people. And in the newspapers of, like, obviously the Communist Party, but also like what we call the New Left or the Radical Left, Chukakuha, Kakumaroha, Kaihoha, sometimes their headlines are like, defend the Constitution, this bourgeois piece of paper. And you can also see it when they write about their concerns of coming wars. So, their whole slogans are no to war. I had a discussion today with a Chukaku woman who told people around her not to buy our paper because we defend China. So I mentioned to her, I said, well, you have a slogan, and it's been your main slogan for a while. Do not allow the invasionary war of China by the U.S. and Japan. I said, well, what if a war breaks out? What is your position going to be? And she goes, our position's going to be no war. It just stops at that. We can talk later maybe about Chukaku's position on China, but that's a side point. But it's just the left imbibes in the false ideology that Japan is not only peaceful, but it can bring peace to the world.
That sounds pretty kooky. But I can also understand that. You mentioned in your article that as a result of this, the JCP, the Japanese Communist Party, they're kind of seen as basically part of the status quo. And you also mentioned that, now they play really a tiny role in the political landscape and their influence has been sort of weakening. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how the left is seen or what is its role in Japanese politics or, amongst the working class?
Maybe to start with, there's a Communist Party, and that it is, and the Communist Party has, I think, close to, maybe not anymore, 300,000 members, maybe, so it is a significant, party. They are leading one of the trade union federations. The trade union federations are split sort of by political alignment. There's the biggest one is supporting like some bourgeois parties, and then the one led by the Communist Party, Zenroren, is smaller, but especially they have a base among the hospital workers, a lot of women, which is important base. Yeah, so they do actually have a base. Yeah, in some sectors of the working class, they were driven out of the core, of the metal worker auto factories. They were driven out many decades ago. Anti-communist purge. But yeah, so there's sort of that basis. Then, as Jeanne explained, the Communist Party, for them, sort of the core of what they think to do is we have to protect the constitution. This is what is keeping peace for workers in Japan. And they take this so serious. So all they do is with that in mind. And so their whole perspective, especially over the last 10 years, I won't go further, but especially the last 10 years, we have to find those capitalist parties, mostly they are minor parties, who also want to protect the constitution in whatever way. So they, try to make electoral alliances, all kinds of alliances, take down their own candidates. They try to, bow as deep as they can to sort of make themselves sort of acceptable to these, other capitalist forces. And I think, we have met in the summer, for example, we met a guy who was in the Communist Party, but he was so angry. He said, for years I've kind of gone with this. But of course, the result has been the CPs got weaker and weaker because why support the Communist Party if it's, they can support the capitalist opposition. The Communist Party is not offering any concrete perspective, even for workers to defend their own livelihoods. So it's sort of, that's downward spiral.
I find it very interesting that the big question in Japanese politics is the constitution, and specifically, I guess, the question of militarization. And you would think that therefore opens up the space to talking about why, being a junior partner of U.S. imperialism is bad. But that seems to be missing in part of the national debates that go on. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, why does the discussion just stop at militarization or not? Because, who wrote the Constitution? It's the Americans. What determines whether or not they need to militarize? Right now, in the anti-China war drive, it's the U.S. pushing Japan to adopt a more militarist standpoint. So, how does the question of American dominance of U.S. imperialism, does that figure into these debates, whether on the national level or in the left and so on?
To start with the Japanese Communist Party, they did. I don't know if they still do. The left does not like America. They hate U.S. imperialism. There are 14 major military bases in Japan, which if you take the whole archipelago, it's about the size of California. And there are 120 other sites that are in this country, which is not very large. They hate Trump, but so this plays out differently in different organizations. The CP's position, it had been, is that the U.S. is that Japan is a colony of the U.S. because they control the military. That it basically Japan feels like they can't do what they want to. But what's interesting, and it shows you kind of, I think, the change that's going on in society. We've been to a whole bunch of protests and rallies in the last couple of months. And for example, when the Diet, the parliament, the Congress was voting on whether or not Takaichi was going to win to become prime minister, the CP and the SDP together called a protest in front of the Diet building. Now, these two parties together could bring out tens of thousands of people. That includes like their trade union affiliations. There were 200 people there. It was the smallest rally in front of the Diet I had ever seen. When Trump came to visit, there were 4 separate rallies. We hit, I think, maybe 3 of them. The largest was 150 people, even though they say that, the thing is at the moment, the left is not bringing out, they just are not bringing out their membership and their periphery at all.
From my understanding of what you're explaining, there is formal opposition to U.S. imperialism, but it's not actually turning into anything real in terms of helping the working class and the left to fight. I mean, I think it's as basic as that. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is that one of the reasons they don't like U.S. imperialism is because they think it's U.S. imperialism that would drag Japan into a war in Asia, particularly China and Taiwan, and
They're
kind of ignoring.
Yeah.
There's also hawks within the LDP. Or Japanese section of the Japanese bourgeoisie and the LDP is just as hawkish as some of the American politicians.
And I think, there's a sort of a contradiction in the left, like what you just mentioned. So the Communist Party, and it's very obvious, like the US to a large, and it's also not new, even in the 80s, the US, again, when it was necessary, it came down very hard on Japan, it kind of economically created huge problems for the whole Japanese economy. And now it's kind of obvious. And so the JCP, the Communist Party, is kind of complaining about the US is very common. But then, of course, there's the question, okay, what do you do? Like, are you going to fight against them, for example, the military alliance? And then the Communist Party is like, oh, first, no, we need to, ally with that or the other, capitalist party to be
make
peaceful.
alliances, right?
Yeah. And then, of course, you cannot be, because that is actually, if you talk about red lines for the bourgeoisie in Japan, the red line is the alliance with the US. It's like, and even, it was interesting, even so the right-wing new party, Sanseto, they made a clear statement, they're against all foreigners and blah, blah, blah. Even, whites, not great. But the military alliance, we are for that against China.
This brings me directly to my next question, which is the question of China. I wanted to, I guess, just ask you to give us a bit of a feel for how different sections of society view China. Like, how does a working class see its relationship or see the whole question of China? Because obviously that plays a huge role in the question of the drive to militarize it. Like, how is it approached? What's the attitudes towards China in the society?
So yeah, I mean, I think there are there are many levels.
Yeah.
Like on the one hand, when we go to workers' rallies, May Day or other rallies, or where the left is present, there's a lot of like how to say sympathy with China in a general way, and it's often. It's often also there's sort of a moralistic, which we can get maybe pacifist. We know what Japan did before, and we are afraid of war. We don't want war, and we are against military relations. It sort of goes together. So there's sort of among a layer of workers, definitely sort of a general sympathy in some level. Like we are afraid of this anti-China, because it's clearly the right wing who's pushing the anti-China thing. But at the same time, then, of course, the other side, like if you look in the bourgeoisie, the Japanese bourgeoisie, it's clear that, the rise of China in the last decades is also really felt very closely by the Japanese imperialists as a threat. So they're kind of, they want to go with Trump, to keep China down. And then there's a lot in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think we've got enough of a picture to come to some of the answers you're putting forward. So your article that we've been referencing throughout is called, well, I'm reading the English translation. It's called Japan in Crisis, the Left in Disarray. workers need to prepare for the coming attacks. So I think you get a bit of a feel for what the crisis really looks like. I think we've been talking about it in political terms, but obviously the point here is that it's the working class, as always, which is going to face the brunt of these attacks, with the cuts to social services, the budgets needed for militarization, and so on. So I guess, can we now start bringing the conversation to how you propose that the left needs to fight to put itself in a better position? You have three sort of proposals. One is a fight against militarization, the other is to rebuild the labor unions, and the third is to fight against state repression. So I wonder if you can maybe just walk us through, how will this address the crisis of the left?
Okay,
we can
sure.
Take it in turns.
Yeah, maybe we can, maybe before going into that, just one step back, I think, because today there was one rally by one of the main socialist groups called Chukakuha, and we went there. And I think before going into these concrete points, I think one key thing I think we've seen also internationally in the left is the need for leftists and workers even to just also start by facing the reality. I
think that's an important point. Yeah. Because
I don't want to sound, ridiculous, but it's obvious. But today we went to this rally. There were 1,000 people. It was called by a socialist organization, and their speeches were like, "Down with the government. Racism is bad, and we are one step away from victory." And this was about a specific fight, of train workers who were like, anyway, who were, laid off by the thousands, and maybe 2 people can get some money. But, the thing is, the reality in the society is that the government is relatively popular, the right wing is surging, and the socialists are like in a tiny park with a few hundred people. Obviously, something is not working, and we have to do something about it. And just to mention, we did get into discussions with people because some said, maybe there's a problem.
Okay. So. Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because this is, of course, what we confront with the left in general. There's this illusion that things are going better, the working class is becoming more radical and so on. But, the theme of not confronting reality as it exists and not acknowledging the tough situation that the left finds itself in. Not just in the individual countries where it's present, but also just internationally. The left is not really an important factor internationally. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I don't think so. But could you give us a bit of a taste? In these discussions, is there openness when you start making these arguments that, in fact, things are not looking right? There is a bit of a crisis. Are people open to that argument, or is it more hysterical?
No, so there's, from the leadership of these organizations, of course, there's pressure not to do that, because of it's, because somehow you would have to start facing a question. Okay, what we are doing is maybe not working.
Right.
And try to look, for some political reason. But there's some, today when we were handing out some leaflets and about, okay, how to address the crisis of the left. Some people came and said, oh yeah, this makes sense, finally, somebody says it, that we pronounce that there's a crisis.
Yeah.
So let's discuss about what to do.
And even in the very small rallies organized by the trade unions that we've been to, and we had our front page paper, which you mentioned the title of, people would come back and ask for extra copies. Mm-hmm. They would stand there and read it. And we have this video of this guy today at the morning's labor festival, sitting down and reading the paper and underlining it as he was reading it.
That's nice.
So it's contradictory. People know that there is a problem, but two things. No one is explaining how Japan got into crisis. It's just like it doesn't exist. And then the second thing is that people want answers. And the left is not giving them answers. Saito gave them an answer in terms of what their problem was. But the left is in kind of wonderland or something, They're not facing it at all. Or they think that it's not a problem.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Philip. But also, I think I appreciate your answer as well, which is that it forces them to confront their own problems, right? Because if you say, well, hey, wait a minute, something is not right with the left, we don't have, as much support as we should have, or the right wing is growing, then it means that they have to look in the mirror and ask, okay, well, what have we been doing wrong? And that's what we see internationally that the left is not doing at this moment. They're kind of continuing with their eyes closed, just, full speed ahead on the path that they've been on. So I do think that's an important part of the picture in order to make sense of our answers.
Yeah. So, I think this is what you just said, the facing your own problems. So the militarization is in some way the, dominant theme in society, because it's very clear that the government is actually openly saying we're going to cut the pensions, we are going to raise the taxes, we need a discussion when and how much. So this is the whole, because we need money, because when Trump was here, they announced that they will have 2% of GDP for military, which is a huge increase for Japan again. So the militarization is obviously, the fight against militarization is so connected to the fight for for the own life of the workers in reality. But then, so what is going on is that the Communist Party, most of all, how are they trying to mobilize workers against this militarization? Is they are telling workers that, look, your grandfathers, Japan has a responsibility. Everybody, we should feel responsibility for the crimes of Japan.
Oh my God!
So now and we need to atone for that, and that's why we need to all be against war now, and against the military budget. So it's really on this kind of moralistic basis.
But also I'm sorry, but it's the most elementary thing that a communist party could do is explain that it was the ruling class who dragged the whole country into a bloody world war, not the workers and the soldiers, who had to enlist. It's really disgusting, actually, because it corrupts the consciousness of the working class at all.
It's an empathy, of the emperor, of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, many communist workers at the time, they joined the CP against, the war.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's definitely, it's on many levels, it's a very bad position.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we can imagine workers are not too happy to hear that, when actually you are faced with, I cannot pay my pension, my rent, the money for my kids, and then the communists come and say, I have more responsibility now, what the hell?
That's actually really disgusting.
Yeah, and then so the thing is that it's a good word. You said corrupting the consciousness, and this ideology has corrupted kind of the left here, and it's seeped into the most revolutionary communist groups, when they call themselves. They use the same kind of argumentation. They say, we have to make a militant movement now because we as the Japanese workers have a responsibility, blah 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 blah. So it's
amnesting the emperor, but also US imperialism as well. It's giving a blank check to those guys, because it's all of a sudden the fault and the shared responsibility of the workers as well. Oh wow! That's good to know. I'm glad you brought that up, because it gives you a sense of the society and the pressures in it, but also how the left is failing to actually fight this very disgusting bourgeois blackmail.
Totally. And so they have totally, and the problem is, sort of, as the drive to militarization is increasing, and this pressure is increasing, what's the left doing? The left is not kind of thinking about it, but it's more hysterically, making those appeals to workers, and now everybody has to, feel responsible, and that's the only way. And so it's a really bad spiral that the left is right now in. So we are trying to actually have a real fight with, workers and leftists about this point, that no, the way, for example, the first thing we propose is, we have to start by fighting against the US-Japanese military alliance. Not on a moralistic level, on who is, to feel, but to make a real argument that it's in the material interest of workers here in Japan to fight against, US imperialism and Japanese imperialism. So that's the first key point. And won't go into all the details, but I think the second key element is about China. And that it's a very interesting argument, because on the one hand, the left is very far away from because, they are very pacifist and just saying no war, but they do what Jeanne described, they are really against a war on China. The problem is right now they are really capitulating to the whole anti-China campaign in the sense that they think that workers in Japan should not take a side with China against imperialism, even though, of course, we need to, fight against the Stalinist bureaucracy in China, but still we have to defend the revolution there as a way to make a connection with the workers and peasants in China. And that's actually has been one, I think, key theme of, arguments we've had with leftists. And there's some interest, in this point. Yeah.
The other point that we stress in our article in terms of kind of how to bring the left and the working class together is the question of state repression in Japan, which has always existed, but in the recent period, in the last several years, it's really been ramped up. And it is not unusual for the headquarters of some of the new left organizations, such as Chukakuha and Kakumaro, their headquarters are continually raided. Oh. And you can see videos of these where, the cops come in with buzzsaws to break down the doors to enter into their buildings. You go on a protest, you're always worried about being arrested, being pulled out of the demonstration, out of the march by the cops, and then you're arrested. The other thing that's going on, dorms are being raided on campuses where there is a big presence of student leftists. Now, one would think logically that if all of these organizations are being attacked by the state almost simultaneously, there would be some unity among these groups to come together and protest this and fight against it. However, that is not happening. Sectarianism within the left there's literally bloodlines that have been drawn over the decades that continue to today between these left organizations. So when we write and talk to people about defending, Chukaku, people say, okay, and we say Kakumaro, and they go, oh, no, you can't do that. They betrayed back in 1960,
Oh, wow.
But it has weakened the left to such an extent that these groups are getting smaller, not just obviously because of state repression, but that does have an impact. I'll give you another example. There's several political prisoners in Japan. One is a man named Osaka, and he is a long-term member, like 60-year member of Chukakuha. He was in hiding for 40 years. Police found him. They arrested him. He went through a trial last year. And we approached his defense organization as the Partisan Defense Committee to what can we do to aid this comrade? We can give some money for his support and his defense work. We would like to make him a stipend prisoner. And they just said no, because you're Spartacist. Now, we don't even know if Osaka is aware that we made this offer. Right. So it's vitally necessary for the left to put all this crap that they've been carrying since they came into formation, like in the 1950s, to put it aside and come together as one unit to have united front protests against this state repression, because it just emboldens the state, to be honest, when they see that there's really no pushback or very little pushback,
Yeah. I mean, I guess you kind of spoken about this, but I wonder if you can elaborate, why is the sectarianism so deep? I mean, it's not new. Let's get that clear. This is what we see in other countries as well with the left. We've been fighting, actually. I'm glad you mentioned the Partisan Defense Committee. I mean, in many countries where we have it, we've been fighting for United Front Defense. So, for example, like pro-Palestinian activists and so on and so forth. But one difficulty we always confront is the sectarianism of the left, where there's this refusal to do united work. And I wonder, how do we understand that in the context of the Japanese left? Why are they so... is it this brittle politics of if we do united work together, then we're capitulating to our opponents? Is it that, or is it?
I mean, I think it's not an easy question, to be honest. I'm not so. I don't think there's the answer, but I mean,
for sure.
for example, one thing is obvious and a bit like if you look at the Japanese art groups, especially the ones who hate each other most and who say they are like counter-revolutionaries to each other, if you put the papers beside each other,
they say the same
like
thing.
they have the same title. They have, no change of the constitution, against war.
Defeat the fascist Takaichi and Trump.
So it's to if you go to a worker, it makes no sense. I mean, and I think, one component I can understand this. It's a bit because if you had like a camaraderie relation and you, for example, fought actually together for some common thing, naturally you would get into discussion and and more of a debate. And to be honest, they don't have any political basis to have a real debate, because if they are right about each other, it's only throwing insults. These are counter-revolutionary spies who, there are sometimes differences and some of them are important differences. Like, I don't want to deny that either, but there's this tendency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's another factor that actually is really real that still carries on until today. The infighting among the Japanese left has been particularly brutal. And so for the period literally from the 70s, 80s, and until I think 1999, it's not just like physical fights, but they kill each other. Like I was just finishing reading this book on the history of the Japanese New Left, and the estimate is that 140 members of different left organizations have been killed during this period. And
by other left organizations.
By other left organizations. And it's a question of, to a certain extent, and it sounds silly, it's a question of turf. Mm-hmm. One particular group politically controls one campus, another one does another campus, and you can't cross that barrier. And this also extends into the trade union movement, because these different organizations have a good number of members in some very important industries. And if you cross that line, it's horrible.
Wow. Okay.
Can I one thing? I wanted to bring a bit back to the article. No, it's good. Like the connection, because I think because one aspect that we also saw, I think today, for example, at this big Chukaku rally, relatively bigger, is they are so stuck in generalities and abstract formulas, right? So they say, down with racism, down with the government. I mean, of course we can agree, we are communists. Of course we hate the government. The imperialist government, we are against racism. But so, okay, what's your proposal how to get there? Zero. There was zero. And so this is one thing that we try to, it's a beginning, and it's one proposal. But what in our article, what we try to, give some basis for a real debate with leftists. Like, look, here's a proposal, what to do. You can give your own and give a counter proposal. Maybe yours is better. But let's get rid of these, because that is the other aspect. When they scream at each other, they scream, down with this, no, down with that, no, against racism, again, without any real political, content or direction of struggle for the workers.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a bit depressing in terms of the left. The third point, you guys say that we need to fight to rebuild the labor unions. Tell us a little bit about that. I was also interested when at the start, Philipp, you mentioned that the unions are organized along political lines, so they're affiliated to political parties. So how do we rebuild the labor unions where there's these barriers that are on political lines?
I mean, so it's obviously a very bad situation for the working class. So that, the membership, I think probably, in the 80s, there was a whole much stronger union movement, like in many countries. But it has been, especially in the 90s and 2000s, I think, so the union movement has been really going down much. And it went together with, Japanese imperialism investing a lot, like closing down many factories here, investing in China, or in Thailand to like cheaper locations. So there was a lot of attacks on the workers here, and the union leaderships, they basically accepted these big attacks. And, so more and more workers are not anymore part of the union movement. Less and less they are seen as really, organizations for defending the lives of workers. So that has, kind of contributed to like more and more smaller groups more and more splits. And then the problem is, like what Jeanne said, right? The left has some locations where they are implanted, but they have no perspective of how to actually, unite the workers. Because of course, once you have that perspective, and that we lay out in our article, it's not just, of course we should fight together, but it's not just going to happen by calling on people, oh, let's all unite and fight together. Because there are real, leaderships in these organizations that want to stop that. So we need a perspective sort of uniting the workers, but also connect that with a perspective against the leaderships in the unions that have led the unions to the very bad situation that they are in right now.
All right. So the 3 points, I think those sound like the basic things that the left can start to do in order to confront some of the key problems. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah. I think we did cover them, the key points. We can say one thing is we will have a public meeting in Tokyo tomorrow, where we also invited a lot of these groups that we talked about today to come. We will see what happens.
And is your public meeting based on this article that we were discussing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Based on this article, trying to explain the crisis of the left and some proposals how to concretely address this and go forward for the working class. Of course, we should say that right now, we Spartacists at the ICL, we don't have a group right now in Japan. We don't have a section, but we are trying to, of course, there's a need
working towards that.
Yeah, to build a communist section of the International Communist League in Japan. So we are working with that aim, of course. And so that's why we're here. We also have an account on X. This is at ICL_NIHON. So Nihon. Exactly.
What does that mean?
Japan.
Okay. Out of curiosity, is the public meeting in Japanese?
Yes.
Yes.
So one of you speaks Japanese. That's very cool. Which one of you speaks, or which one of you is going to give the presentation?
Philipp is.
Tomorrow.
That's so cool.
And we'll have some people to.
Will it be recorded?
I think we will try to record it, yeah.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I would like to see a meeting in Japanese. That's cool.
Just on our public meetings, it's not the first one that we've done. But at the last one we had in May, we had a member of Chukaku come. And I asked him, I said, so I'm really glad you're here. And what sparked you to come to our meeting? And he said, well, on your leaflet, you said that there would be a presentation and discussion. And I came for a discussion because I'm in Chukaku and I have a lot of questions. And then their answer is to tell me to go to the next demonstration.
So no discussion.
Another CP guy, when he came, he went home and went on his X and said, you all are so stupid for not going to the Spartacist meeting because they actually allowed people to talk at it.
Really?
Yes. He said there was a real discussion and they talked about international events. It was really interesting.
Wow. Okay. That's at once sad and nice to hear, that the discussion doesn't happen.
So for those listeners who are tomorrow in Tokyo, on
probably
Monday,
nobody, but still. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, comrades. I know it's late for you right now, but I really appreciate you taking the time to help us make sense of this pretty interesting country. Now that I understand a little bit, I feel like I'm more drawn into understanding more of the politics. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, well, I'll say goodbye and then good luck on your meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.